Hello, everyone. How's everyone this afternoon?
Feeling better.
That's good. That's good.
Rest.
That's good. Very good. So let's see. Any questions? Okay. I thought we'd do a couple of things today. One is actually talking about the research assignment that you're doing. And a number of you did tell me what town you're working on. A number of you didn't. So if you didn't, it would be really helpful if, let me just see who is here that hasn't. Let's see, Lisette, I haven't heard from you about.
I didn't know if you remembered from when I sent you the email beforehand.
No, I
But,
didn't. I'm sorry. I thought you probably had, yeah.
I'm doing the town of Attleboro,
Oh, good, good.
and I found a story from Attleboro about the Assonet expedition, which
Oh, right,
was
yeah. Okay, now I remember you telling me
Yeah.
about it. Okay, good. Because I think Jillian is also doing Attleboro, right? Is she here?
Yeah, I'm also doing Attleboro.
Okay. Do you know about the Abbaset expedition?
I haven't thoroughly looked into that specifically, but I have heard of it.
Okay, okay, good. Let's see. Jesse, what do you have in mind?
I'm gonna do Marblehead.
Right, okay. I knew someone was doing Marblehead. Good.
And I found a story about the soldiers, sailors, and prisoners of war.
Oh, great. Very good, very good. Let's see, Dylan. I know I've got Dylan for Andover. Let's see. Lilla, I have for Arlington or Menotomy. And Marina is Marshfield. Bill Bannon, you are Arlington too. Let's see, Jacob Gam, what are you up to?
I'm doing Sharon.
Okay, that's right. You contacted me about that, right? And did you, or was it someone else?
I told you about the furnace and stuff.
Great. Okay, good. Let's see, Cassidy, what's on your mind?
I'm doing Tewksbury.
Tewksbury. Good. Have you found anything on Tewksbury?
I found a little bit more on Andover, which is also kind of near where I live.
Okay. Okay, would you want, because we also, I mean, you're free to do either one.
Yeah, I was thinking about just switching.
Okay,
I didn't find a lot.
okay, that happens. Good. Let's see, I'm entering the waiting room while I'm talking to you all. Let's see.
Professor, you put us in breaking rooms. Are we supposed to be doing something?
Not yet. You will be, Terry. Good eye, Tariq. What we are going to do is I'm trying to pair up people who are doing related towns, and we'll get into these breakout rooms, and then you'll be able to talk to other people about what you're doing. Okay. I thought this might be helpful rather than just, listening to me. I mean, I'm happy to talk, or I'm happy to try to get you doing something productive. So, okay. So now have you figured out what you're doing, Tariq?
Yeah.
And what is it?
Since I'm not in the US, I've only been to Boston and I've only seen a few historic items in Boston. I thought I'd just do Boston.
Okay, there's a lot there, but that's not going to fault you for doing Boston.
Yeah.
Okay, good, very good. Okay, let's see. Dylan Katz, do I have you down for something?
No, sorry, I didn't see your email. I'm just seeing it now.
Okay.
But I'm in Lincoln, Rhode Island. But
Really?
I emailed Mr. Lane,
Oh yes.
and he said that he's actually currently living in Lincoln, Rhode Island too. I thought that was so weird because this is a pretty small town. But
it is.
He said that Lincoln didn't exist during that time. It split off from Smithfield, which is right next to our town. So I'm probably going to be doing something with that. But he said I might have to go to the Rhode Island Historical Society because nothing's digitized.
Okay.
But got the ball rolling there. Don't exactly know what exactly I'll be doing, but
Okay. No,
at
well,
least I know that.
Okay. Well, that's good. Let's see. Lane, what do you have in mind?
So I'm originally from Lowell, but
Okay.
that was incorporated a little after
Yes.
1820 as
Yes.
a mill town. So I decided on doing Drakeit,
Okay.
about 500 feet from the border. So
Okay. Yeah. Well, also, wasn't Lowell part of Chelmsford? Is anything there?
yeah, so basically what happened was the part of Lowell I'm from, so Lowell's kind of split by the Merrimack River.
Mm-hmm.
And this part was Drakeit, and most of the rest of it was Chelmsford. I think a little bit of Tewksbury,
Okay.
but then it was incorporated. But Drakeit has its own historical society. And they've had their own historical society for 120 years now.
Wow. Wow. So
Yeah.
you've been in touch with them?
Yeah, there's a lot of information.
Really? Well, that's great.
Drakeit.
Oh, great. Great.
And the library's been working with me really good.
Okay. That sounds great. Okay, good. So let me see. Does anyone have any questions about the project and what's happening with it? I mean, it sounds like most of you are making some progress on it. Let me just make sure I've talked to everybody who's here and everyone has something that they're doing. Okay. If you'll just bear with me for a moment, I'm trying to assign you to these breakout rooms so that people who are working on related things can actually connect with each other. So let me just see if I can do that quickly. Okay, some of you will be working with people who are doing absolutely nothing related to what's your project, so I apologize for that. And let me see. Let me just see. Okay. You know what? Instead of trying to pair you up in such a well-organized way, I'm just going to do it automatically just to save time. And I can tell a number of you who are doing related areas. So Jillian and Lisette, you're both doing Attleboro. Do you know each other?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, let me try to put you together then. I apologize. You see, I was trying to set up the breakout rooms before the class began, but I actually have to wait until you're actually in the class in order to do this. So I know a poor workman blames his tools. And so let's see. Okay. Okay, so now you should all be assigned to rooms, I think.
Professor, I got assigned a room, but I was
Yes.
the only one in the room, so I left. You have to,
Okay,
like,
let's see. And I'm sorry, I'm not seeing you on the screen. Who are you again?
Kathy.
Oh, Cassidy, okay. I thought I did assign you to a room. You are assigned to a room and there are two other people in it. It says you haven't joined.
Oh, I didn't get the like notification. Oh wait, never mind. I see it. Thank you.
Okay. And let's see, Marina, you haven't joined. Hello, Nicole.
Hello.
I've assigned, what town are you doing research on?
Stoughtonham?
Stoughtonham or Stoneham?
Stoughtonham, like
Stoughtonham.
the area like Stoughton, Canton.
Okay. And what are you finding?
I mean, there's a lot, especially just from everywhere. I found I was looking into I've really been like intrigued with looking at just like lists of different men like who are involved. And then sometimes I find like their occupation and then I try and see if I can like find anything else about them and like because everybody was a part of the revolution and I don't know, I just find it fascinating that you could have like stonemasons, I don't know, like the quintessential American Revolution story of just this ragtag group of people. But I've been
Yeah.
like focusing a lot of my research more so on that, like kind of just like the misfits, I guess, like how everything was kind of like piecemeal.
I see. Okay, good. No, that sounds good. It sounds like you've done a lot. What I've just done is put the class into breakout rooms so people can talk to others about what they're finding. And in some cases, they're in a group with other people doing a related area. And there is another guy in the class who was doing Sharon, and he's found a lot, and that's somewhere in that area. But yeah, that sounds good. So what I'm going to do now is assign you to a breakout room, and then you can, let me just see if I can find the other person, and that would be helpful. You know, I'm actually going to put you in a different room because there's one that has fewer people, and you probably can give them a hand.
All right.
So you should have gotten an invitation, I think. Yes. Great. Hello, Georgia. Okay. I think we've lost a few people along the way. It does sound like you're making progress. Most of you have found something you can work with, and which is good. Just a couple of observations since it came up with a couple of groups. A primary source doesn't mean it is handwritten. It's not necessarily something you find in someone's attic. It's anything that was done at the time. So it could be a newspaper, it could be a list of people, a tax roll. I mean, some of you have found really extraordinary things, and you're at a stage where you really don't know that you found this extraordinary thing. You know, a list of the guys from Andover who marched to the Lexington Alarm on April 19th, 1775, or, you know, tax records from this town and from Smithfield, Rhode Island, or other things like that. And what you then do is you should, I mean, if you find enough stuff and you have too much stuff, you can do a nice story about what happened. Some of you have, and some of you could then, you're at the beginning of a career as an historian doing the history of this town, which is great. Others maybe just found one thing, and so you work with that. And you never know what you're going to find or what use you can make of it. So that's part of the whole exercise. I don't know what is going to be the final result of your project, but I look forward to seeing it. And, you know, some of you have run into brick walls. So then you write about running into brick walls. And, you know, maybe there is a way to get through the wall. I mean, maybe, you know, some of you have found the door and can get through. So that's, it's good. So far, so good. And let me just ask if it would be, I know the due date is Friday, and since some of you are kind of struggling to find stuff, would it be worthwhile to put the due date off till Monday?
Yes.
Okay, okay, we'll do that. Okay, Marina says yes. Okay, so Monday it is, and that'll give you more time to find stuff and to make something of it, okay? And again, some of you are working on related areas, so you know, we should contact each other, and that would be helpful. I mean, one person had not found anything, another person working in the same town actually gave him the book that she had found. So maybe you'll get lucky like that and find someone else has already done the work. And but yes, so good. Okay. Will there be a submission for? Okay. Why don't you just email it to me on Monday instead of having a submission portal on Blackboard? I think my project for next semester is to figure out submission portals on Blackboard.
I have a question really quick. I know
Yes,
I
Lila.
asked you one during the breakout room, but after me and William started talking about Arlington, could we focus on people as well and not what their role was? Because Jason Russell and Daniel Reed are both.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Yes. Yes. Yeah, that would be perfect. I mean, you know, you are the ones who now know better than I do what's there.
Yeah.
And so you're doing two things. One is you're finding some sources, which then will be helpful to other people, but then also, you know, you're finding things that you hope will be of interest to you or to others. Okay. So yes. Yeah, I'm not going to tell you, no, you have to do it, some, you know, list, some analysis of the tax records of Menotomy in 1775, but yeah.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions on this whole project? Okay. Okay, I thought what it might be useful just to talk about briefly, since, you know, we're all here, you know, kind of gone through step by step, the build up to the revolution, the war, and that is all really, I think, really interesting and important stuff. But one of the really most significant things that comes out of the American Revolution is the creation of a functioning series of governments. As you probably know, it's really easy. Well, not it. You know, the revolutionaries had two big tasks. One was to overthrow the bad old regime. The second was to create a regime that wouldn't be worse. And most revolutions have failed at the second one. And so these people didn't. And this is, I think, what makes this such an interesting period. So I'll talk a little bit about this. And if you have questions or observations, jump in. You probably are aware of the fact that in 1776, At about the same time, Congress was drafting a Declaration of Independence. It also drafted something called the Articles of Confederation. And this is an agreement among these independent states about how they will work together. Sometimes we look at this and say, this was the first draft of a constitution, and if we look at it in that way, we're wrong, okay? So, because no one thought of it as a constitution. What we do see is in each state, people creating constitutions, creating a system of government that would govern them. And they have all kinds of different models. One of the first was actually in Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania creates a very democratic state government. It's a complicated story about how they do this that probably only interests those of us who are interested in ancient politics as opposed to contemporary political events. But what happens is Pennsylvania creates a state government which has a single house legislature, that is an assembly, representing all of the adult men over the age of 21. If you're over 21 and you're a man and you've paid a shilling in taxes, you get to vote for members of the state legislature. And if you are over 21 and you haven't paid a shilling in taxes, but your father had, you get to vote for the state legislature. The thinking here is, what had stymied us in the past was having an assembly, and then there was a proprietor and a governor who could veto things the assembly did. Now we've gotten rid of the proprietor, so we can have an assembly that basically does whatever the people want. So a single house assembly. And by the way, every other state also has some kind of a property qualification for voting. And there's a good reason for this. They wanted people, the biggest thing governments do. By the way, does anyone know what is the biggest thing governments do?
Tax.
It's a tax, right? Well, why do they impose taxes, Dylan? Just because they can?
Well, the idea of commonwealth, it's in the word commonwealth. It's one giant pot for everyone to supposedly ultimately benefit from collectively.
I think you're kind of looking at that in the wrong way, but you're looking at it as a pot you can draw out of, as opposed to it is something we hold in common.
Yeah.
Okay. No, I'm not trying. I am trying to correct your fallacious notion here about what the purpose of the Commonwealth is. Governments do certain things. For one thing, paying the soldiers who are marching off to defend you, or building roads, supporting that kind of thing. In some cases, governments provide schools. And in order to do that, they need money. And they get the money through taxes. I mentioned in Pennsylvania, every man over the age of 21 pays taxes. And one of the big grievances in Pennsylvania before was that the proprietors, the people who owned Pennsylvania, didn't pay taxes on their land. Everyone else did. And because the proprietors owned a big chunk of Pennsylvania, it meant everyone else's taxes were higher. So you have governments that do tax. And we saw this running into trouble with the British government taxing and people saying we're not represented. But here in Pennsylvania, everyone is represented in the assembly. There also is an executive council because they think, okay, this is a big body, this assembly. They're not going to be in session all the time. So they will elect an executive council that can run things when the assembly is not in session, and the executive council has to have someone to preside over it, and that person is called a president, someone who presides. In the 18th century way of thinking, a president has not much power because his job is to preside. And for much of Pennsylvania's history under this Constitution, the president was Benjamin Franklin, who was a man in his 70s or 80s. So he's not someone, I know today 70s or 70 sounds really young. I mean, one of the people who will become president is in his 70s. So apparently we think that's a perfect age to start a career to run things. But in this case, it's an honorary position that Benjamin Franklin has. The assembly is the real source of power. And as Dylan was saying, governments do tax. And governments usually look for good sources of revenue. And it's a big persistent problem. So what would prevent Pennsylvania's assembly from simply saying, okay, anyone who has too much property, will simply tax that and take it away from them and give it to someone else? What would prevent that kind of thing from happening? If the Pennsylvania needs money, it could simply take property away from people who have it. I didn't mean to start that particular harangue about government taking away your money, and you'll think that I have become some kind of a crank. You may already think that. Anyway, Pennsylvania, single house legislature, and I should tell you that it's the most democratic state government created in North America. And John Adams thinks it's terrible. He said that the people of Pennsylvania will fall on their knees to the King of Great Britain, begging them to take them back under his protection and spare them from the tyranny of their government. He sees the great purpose of government is protecting different interests. And if you put all the different interests together in one legislative body, he sees the two biggest interests in a society. Does anyone know? And thinking that Dylan's already introduced the subject of taxes. Two people, well, one group, a much wiser man than I once said, will always be with you. And others are often always with us.
Professor, can you repeat your question, please?
What are the two major interests a society is likely to break into? Two kinds of groups that may have a different interest.
Factions?
Okay, they form factions often. But what motivates someone to join one faction as opposed to another? I think you're on the right track. I mean, and you'll realize there are any number of different factions people can join.
Wait, who's like who? What is this a quote from someone that we're?
No, no, I don't want you. What are some of the major interests that divide a society?
Property, wealth?
Property and wealth. Okay, very good. And so in Pennsylvania, there was property in the form of land. There was property in the form of merchants. And then, of course, there are a lot of people who don't have property. Some people have more than others. And so, who are there more of, by the way, in a society? Those who have a lot of property or those who have more modest amounts of property?
Modest amounts of property.
Thank you, Sean. Modest amounts of property. So consequently, there will be more people of modest means represented in the assembly. And if the assembly's main job is to raise a revenue, why wouldn't they simply tax people with a lot of property so that they don't have to pay as much? What might stop them from doing that?
Maybe the people with a lot of property just decide to leave.
They could, certainly they could decide to leave, but they've already had, and maybe when they leave, they'll have their property confiscated. If it's a single house legislature that's making this kind of rule, they could say, okay, Sean had too much property, he left, we're going to seize his property and divide it up among everybody else. You know, we'll give it to William and Jillian and Dylan. And they'd certainly vote for that. There are three of them, one of you. And so it's 3-1. Say, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Now, Pennsylvania did recognize that this kind of a thing might happen. That is, you could have your property taken. And in fact, Pennsylvania's constitution, all of these state constitutions begin with a Declaration of Rights. That is a reason we're setting up this government. Remember, the Declaration of Independence says that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. So what are the rights we're trying to protect? And one is, it says private property ought not to be taken unless there is some compelling reason for it. Okay, can you imagine a legislative body would find a compelling reason to take away your property? Yeah, they probably would if it suited them. And ought not to be taken. You know, ought is a pretty weak word. You really ought to get to the Historical Society tomorrow and find a source to use in this paper. You know, I really ought to get more exercise and stop being so self-absorbed. I mean, all kinds of things that we can use the word ought. It doesn't really compel us to do anything. Now, Pennsylvania recognized that a legislative body might sometimes do something it ought not to do. And in this case, they voted to take away your property. What they do is every 7 years, they will elect a council of revision. And this council of revision will look into what the legislature has done and see if it did anything it ought not to have done. And if it did, then it will tell the legislature not to do that. So Sean, they've taken away your property. Come back in 7 years and bring your case to the council of revision, and maybe they'll be able to help you out. So that's what Pennsylvania does in creating this state constitution. Also, they do recognize that the legislature might do something. They're not really worried about Sean and his property. They're really worried about a legislature doing something the people might not like. So when the legislature passes a law, the law doesn't take effect until there's been another election for the legislature. It's a way of making sure the legislature doesn't do something wildly unpopular. So as I said, John Adams doesn't think this is a very good constitution. And in fact, the legislature does all kinds of things that maybe it ought not to have done. And by 1792, Pennsylvania creates a new constitution. Now, other states are also creating constitutions. As I said, Pennsylvania is the most radical, most democratic with a small d. Massachusetts is the most, I hesitate to use the word conservative because these words have different meanings today. But John Adams, well, first we'll explain what happens in Massachusetts. In 1775 and 6, British government breaks down, the assembly keeps meeting as the provincial Congress declares the office of governor vacant, and then it keeps doing the things that the old provincial assembly had done, simply without a governor. Think, okay, we will tax people and we'll tell each town how many men they have to send to serve. And in the initial burst of enthusiasm, April 19th, 1775, of course, towns are sending men off to fight. Then it gets to be 1777 and 78, and this provincial Congress, the members still elected at the town meeting, are telling people, okay, this is how much you have to send in, and these are the men from your town who have to go off to serve. And people in the town start saying, what gives you the power to tax us or to ask for us to sacrifice our lives in this particular cause? We could understand if this was the old provincial assembly, because that operated under their charter granted by the king, but we kicked the king out of here. And we never really agreed that you were going to be running things. And so the assembly says, no, that's a pretty fair point. What we'll do is we will write a constitution, and then you can ratify the constitution, and then we will be able to tax you and demand your life in form of military service and do other things. So the Massachusetts Provincial Congress in 1778 writes a constitution for Massachusetts, which gives the provincial Congress the power to do all of these things that it needed to do. And they send it out to the towns of Massachusetts and say, okay, here you go, ratify this, and then we'll be able to continue governing. And the towns in 1779 reject the Constitution by a vote of about almost 10,000 against it to 2,000 in favor. And they have a number of reasons for rejecting it. One is the legislature is created by this Constitution. It cannot also create itself. This is a philosophical problem, but not surprisingly, I suppose, the people in the towns of Massachusetts were pretty keen philosophers. They said that a constitution can only be created by the sovereign power of the people of Massachusetts in a special assembly that's just created for that. I'm really fond of my state rep, but if it comes to something really important like drafting a constitution, I can think of other people who might be better suited for that job than he is. And don't tell him that if you run into him. But also, some people in particularly Essex County, a very conservative area, didn't like the fact that this constitution didn't do enough to protect property. They wanted some limits on legislative power. There also was a push, some people in Massachusetts, some people in these towns, in explaining why they rejected what the legislature had proposed, say we really thought a constitution should do something about the institution of slavery. So they reject the Constitution. So the next year, the Assembly meets and they call for a constitutional convention, which is elected specifically to draft a constitution. And this constitution meets in the fall of 1779. And it happens that John Adams has just returned from his first European sojourn. He is elected to this convention that meets in Cambridge in September of 1779. The convention puts him on a committee to draft a constitution. The committee puts him on a subcommittee that consists of himself, Samuel Adams, and James Bowdoin. And they say, you've thought more about government than anyone else. Why don't you draft the Constitution? So Adams does. He drafts a constitution for Massachusetts. And like other constitutions, it begins with a Declaration of Rights, very much like the declarations of rights other state constitutions have, except it uses shall instead of ought. And it's 30 articles in the Massachusetts Declaration of Rights. And unlike the big problem the states had in drawing up constitutions was this. All of the states had had this political problem with governors before. The governors appointed by the crown or by the proprietor had stymied what the assembly had wanted. So what every constitution did, Pennsylvania has an executive in the form of a committee. Other states have someone who is a governor, but he is chosen by the legislature. That's what happens in Virginia. The governor is chosen by the legislature, which means the legislature also can fire him. This gives the legislature the power to choose who is going to execute the laws. Big problem. And how do you find someone else, though? The old governor could act as a check on the legislature because he wasn't chosen by the legislature. But the new governor is chosen by the legislature. How can he check what the legislature does? And a lot of the drafters of constitutions said, well, we don't want the governor to check what the legislature does because what the legislature is doing is what the people want. And why would the people ever do something wrong that needed to be checked? Adams is less optimistic about legislatures not doing things that might be destructive of the rights listed in the Declaration of Rights. So he has a governor who is chosen by a popular vote. It's the only state that does this. Governor chosen by a popular vote. New York has a governor chosen actually by committees of electors in the counties of New York. The electors are chosen by some of the voters in New York who then choose a governor. So it's an indirect way of choosing a governor. Massachusetts is the only state where the governor is elected by a popular vote. There also is a two-house legislature. There is the assembly, and if you pay £3, if you have an estate worth £3 a year in a town, you can vote for members of the assembly. The assembly is going to vote on taxes. They don't want people who don't own property voting for an assembly and then overtaxing the people with property. Also, property represents a permanent stake in the society. You haven't just arrived in Tewksbury and now are representing it in the assembly. You have to have a permanent stake in the society, and property was one way of measuring that. So if you have an estate that generates an income of £3 a year, you can vote for members of the assembly. And every town with 100 people will have at least one representative. If there are 150 people, you get another representative and so on. So the Massachusetts Assembly is going to have close to 400 members. But Adams recognized he didn't like the single house in Pennsylvania. He thought you need a check on this particular house. So there's going to be a state senate. And Adams saw the two big interests are property and those with less property. And it's going to be in the interest of the people with less property to try to tax those who have more property. He also saw the people with more property might try to oppress the people with less property. But in a democratic system, they're going to be less in danger of that. But he wanted a state senate that would represent property. So he does two things. In order to be a member of the state House of Representatives, you needed to have an estate that generated at least £100 a year. That's about $40,000, which would put you today kind of in the lower middle class, I think, or maybe less. In order to be a member of the state Senate, you had to have an estate worth, I think, £400 a year. So you had to be significantly wealthier to be in the state Senate. Also, the state legislature is determined by population. The state Senate is determined by tax revenues. So the counties that send the most in tax revenues to the state treasury have more senators. Essex County and Suffolk County each have 8. Bristol County has 1 or 2. Middlesex County, I think, has 4. And then Hampden County, Barnstable County have 1 or 2 each. There are 40 state senators, a much smaller body. By the way, does anyone know how many state senators there are in Massachusetts today? You're thinking of US senators. There's still 40. By the way, the Massachusetts Constitution is the oldest functioning written constitution in the world. It is still the Constitution, the same one John Adams drew up. They no longer have the property qualification, okay? But you have this idea of the state senators to represent wealth, because Adams said the great art of law giving consists in balancing the rich against the poor in the legislature so that neither one can control the other. Also, he said, it means balancing the legislative against the executive branch. These are natural rivals. If one doesn't have an effective check on the other, the weaker will ever be the lamb in the paws of the wolf. So you have a governor not chosen by the legislature, but chosen by a popular vote. And the governor also has to be really, really rich. He has to have an estate worth £1,000, which is quite significant. And Massachusetts does have a long tradition of electing really rich people to be governor, even though it's no longer a requirement. So you have a governor. And the reason he's really rich is so he's not going to get elected governor so that he can raid the public till. He is supposed to be independent. So you have this system with a governor elected by a popular vote, and he also can veto things the legislature does. A lower house of the legislature representing the common people, and then an upper house supposedly representing wealth. And there also is a judiciary that is judges. There always had been judges in Massachusetts, and they are chosen by the governor with the consent of a governor's council. And this is a vestigial body that had existed before. So Massachusetts has kind of a complicated government, but it's designed that for a reason, to balance these different competing interests in society. And Adams understood that the executive and the legislature won't always get along, but that's a good thing, because if one is running the show without any check, that leads to tyranny. So it's a complicated system as a way of preventing either a governor from simply being tyrannical or an assembly from being tyrannical, because Adams recognized that either one could. If there were bumper stickers in this period, you would have seen a lot that said, nature has formed this tincture in the blood. All men would be tyrants if they could. This is a well-known saying at the time. And you stop anyone on the street and say that, and they'll know exactly what you're talking about. That's in 1776, 1780, probably less so today. You get a lot of strange looks. So this period is the most important in the history of the world for creating functioning systems of government. And we see in the Massachusetts example, a way of trying to prevent a shattering between the rich and the poor, controlling these different factions and preventing them from overriding everything else. So that's enough for today, I suppose. And I will let you go, and I will look forward to seeing you all on Monday and finding out what you found out about your town. So if you have any questions, let me know. and I will look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you, Professor.
Take
Yeah.
care.
Have a great weekend.
You too.